when we're giving to other people, we also tend to look for the evidence of our contribution in their lives. So we want to see, how is what I'm contributing changing your life? You know, how is it being meaningful and making an impact there? And sometimes we don't see that right away, right? Because change is subtle, and sometimes it doesn't show up the way we think it's going to. So tuning in with ourselves and saying, how was I transformed today? What did I learn today?
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're talking about such an important topic, how to give without overextending yourself. I think this is something we can all relate to. Our guest today is Elizabeth Bishop. She is the creator of the Conscious Service Approach. This is designed to support healing professionals to reconnect with and fulfill their desire to make a difference in the lives they support and also practice self-care. And we're going to talk about how this applies in all sorts of situations. And I share some personal stories, and so does she. She has a Developmental Services degree, a Psychology and Religious Studies degree. She has a master's in adult education. The list goes on and on. So I loved picking her brain about this incredibly important topic. The reality is that so many of us, and probably likely maybe also you, if you're listening, happen to be an empath, right? Or a teacher or a healing professional. And we often experience burnout, exhaustion, and compassion fatigue. So the episode today is really devoted to tackling the question, how can we passionately serve others without sacrificing our own personal well-being? And we're going to talk about how Elizabeth's work applies to caring for students, if you're a yoga teacher, caring for clients, if you're a massage therapist or a therapist, or how it applies to just caring for a loved one with an injury or a chronic illness, which I think we'll all go through at some point in our lives. Before we dive into today's amazing episode, and it's really so juicy, I had pages of notes after talking to Elizabeth and so many personal aha moments that I'm already implementing in my own life as a caretaker. I wanted to remind you of the ways that you can show your support for the podcast, for the show. And the two ways are to make a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com. They have incredible, beautiful yoga clothing, jewelry, healing energy crystals, and they have now out the holiday gift guide, the 2018 holiday gift guide. So if you haven't checked out their gift guide, it has so many great ideas for gifts that you can either give or ask to receive. And remember, if you've never purchased something on SavannahSpirit.com, you can get $25 off by using that coupon code TAKE25. So just $25 off your whole shopping cart. The other way you can show your support is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. That makes a huge difference and helps other people find the show. And I'm super excited to announce that Savannah Spirit and I have teamed up to bring you a New Year's yoga series. It's amazing. It's designed around the lower four chakras. It's called Elemental. So if you want to sign up to get 14 free yoga classes, all designed around the lower four chakras, go over to brettlarkin.com/elemental, and it will subscribe you to get all those classes when they come out January 1st, completely free from me and Savannah Spirit as a gift. And now let's dive into today's conversation with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here and coming on the Savannah podcast.
And thank you so much, Brett, for having me here. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Well, I was so excited to connect with you because you were talking to us about this concept, or talking to me about this concept of being really grateful when you get to be in service of another person. And this especially resonated for me right now. I'm taking care of my father who's very ill, and it's rewarding, but it's also such a huge burden in this other sense, you know. And I've always heard of people saying that, you know, caring for a loved one or having some big responsibilities. We all have a lot of responsibilities in life. And I'm interested to hear you talk about how we can really embrace our role when we're the caretaker.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that that's such a a valid question, because I don't think that we are encouraged that way at all. I think that, one of the big myths that I see around service, and really noticing it lately, is that service translates directly into sacrifice.
Yes.
So anytime we're thinking, oh, I have to give something up, I'm losing something, I'm sacrificing myself for somebody else. I mean, we can only go so far with that. It doesn't feel like a gift. Right. But if we flip that around and understand that, to serve, I really believe that we're all here to serve each other in some way, shape, or form. For some people, that's really, traditional through a professional role. And for others, it comes out through caring for our loved ones, like you're talking about with your dad. And I think if we can shift and recognize that to be of service is a gift to us as well, that there's a lot that we can receive through that process of being of service, that it's not just about giving out, but it's about opening and expanding our capacity to receive through that interaction and through that relationship. Then it becomes a gift.
Well, I want you to tell us more about this, but I also, really jived with what you were saying earlier, that just on a societal level, right? Service isn't so much rewarded. It's like, it's an achievement mindset that I think permeates our culture so much. So, anytime you're going after a goal or achieving something or getting a promotion at work, like that's all considered really worthwhile. While some of these other activities, like I know Savannah listeners, like yoga or meditation, are now what we're talking about, actually sort of like not doing, not achieving, but just choosing to be in service of someone else, is almost like considered, like that word I used earlier, like a burden or a waste of time. Why do you think that mindset's just like the default in our culture? Or do you agree with me that that's what's happening?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And it only just kind of came into my realization a few weeks ago. I mean, I know I've thought about this before, but in a conversation with a friend of mine, they were talking about how in our society, we do not value service. So, I mean, even if we're looking at, what you're talking about in serving your dad, like being of service to your dad, helping your dad, being a caregiver, we don't value that. It's kind of just, oh yeah, it's happening, and, people do what they have to do. But even people who are in traditional roles, I mean, in say social work or nursing or things like that, there's not a lot of value from a, say a material perspective that's placed on those roles. And then people who are probably a lot of the listeners here of the podcast, who are serving humanity through alternative means, through providing yoga classes, through providing energy work. Well, that's valued even less, isn't it? I mean, there's not a whole lot of, a lot of times the credibility of that is even questioned in our society.
I know. And a lot of these people often, I've talked about this on this podcast and others, but a lot of times those folks feel like they can't charge for their work, right? Have you met this, like amazing healers and energy workers or massage therapists or yoga teachers who have a lot of money blocks? So I don't want to diverge us too much, but I do think it is something that I think awareness is always the first step. I know for me. So it's like being aware that, wow, this is a societal norm that's permeated. Like even if you look at how we don't really have maternity benefits or leave in this country, or, I don't think very many companies out there are supportive of like, oh, you have a sick family member, that should be a priority. You need some time right now. That's just not something that is really present in our culture right now. And I think just admitting that openly to ourselves and starting a dialogue about it all of a sudden kind of changes the dynamic, at least, where you're like, okay, this isn't ingrained. This is like this is what is the norm right now. But I know that there is value in this. So,
let me say one thing about that, Brett, because I think the societal perspective is huge around that, because obviously we are society. We're not separate from society. So we're impacted, and we impact on the beliefs and the norms that our society accepts at the time. But I find with all of the people that I've met over the years who are called to serve, there's way more comfort in giving than there is in receiving for those individuals. Way more comfortable in giving out, in doing for others, and responding to others' needs than there is in actually stepping back, allowing themselves to receive, and sort of expanding their capacity to care for themselves. So it's kind of interesting, but I feel like people that are drawn naturally to service are often wired that way. And so it's a little bit of unlearning maybe.
I think you are really onto something there. And why do you think that is? Like, why are we so resistant to receive? And this is something I heard echoed in the Savannah community and my own uplifted community. It's like people are always saying, like, I need to prioritize self-care. I need to shift into receptivity, and the yoga practice is so helpful and meditation practice is so helpful with doing that. But it's like, why is it such a struggle? Like, what is your insight into this? Why is it so hard to receive? Because it should be easy to receive.
I wish I had the golden answer for that. That's a learning in progress for sure. But I know that I can speak from, the perspective of working with people in sort of traditional human services, being in that kind of field myself for many years. And then also as an adult educator, helping people prepare to go into that kind of career work, service to humanity in that way. I feel as though people, they come to the role again and their perspective of what that role is going to be has very little to do with themselves as the person who's going to provide that service to somebody else. And that's really reinforced. I mean, I'm sure that many of the people that you know as well have heard, so you're teaching a yoga class. Well, it's not about you. It's about the people who are at the class. You're a counselor. Well, it's not about you. It's about the person that you're counseling. And of course, the subject, the individual taking the class or the story that somebody might be sharing with you, yes, that's what the service is focused on in that moment. But how we show up in service to other people has absolutely everything to do with us.
I love it. So tell us how we can show up. And I know you have your own approach, the conscious service approach, right? So tell us a little bit about that and what you recommend for folks when they're going into a role of service, whether it's going in to teach a yoga class or going to, visit father at the nursing home or what may be.
Whatever it might be. Well, I'll just back up a tiny little bit and give you a snippet of how conscious service kind of came to be in my own life. It was very much personal journey to begin with. I'd had some shifts in my life. I was going through a divorce. And I was also noticing that I was feeling kind of disenchanted with my role in service at the time. And I came into, being of service and human services when I was about 15 years old. And so, I was just lit up by it, very enthusiastic and knew it was going to be something meaningful for me. And then several years later, I'm, disillusioned, don't feel like getting up in the morning, don't really, see the meaning in what I'm doing. And then as I started to kind of, approach my own personal growth, some reading, some journaling, learning meditation, yoga, whatever I could get my hands on, whatever felt juicy in the moment, I started to realize benefits for myself, but then realize how much what I was learning had to do with the kind of work that I was involved in. And at that time, it was community-based rehabilitation for people who'd experienced a brain injury. And so I started to bring some of that material into the organization, and the organization was wide open to having me talk more about spirituality, to share that with team members and things like that. So one of the things that I always offer for people that I'm working with is to and it's one of the cardinal truths of the conscious service approach, is to declare your contributions. That when we declare our contributions, we set an intentional path and we attract supportive energy, and then people know what to expect from us. And to me, that is an expression of self-love. I really feel that something that we've missed when we talk about service to humanity is the joy and fulfillment of the service provider. We don't focus on that. So what kind of quality of service can we be providing if it feels like a burden, if it feels like too much responsibility, for example, if we feel like we're being drained and we're exhausted, then the quality of our service also goes down. So declaring our contributions helps us to tune into what comes naturally, what excites us, what brings us joy and fulfillment, and then allows that to overflow and find a way of expressing itself through our service.
I love that. And I want to keep it really tangible for the listeners and for myself. So I really love this idea because I love to journal too. I love journaling affirmations and intentions. And you're right, that is kind of missing a little bit when you start shifting into this service place. So I really like how you're shining the light on that. And then, so if I wanted to declare my contribution, we can just go with my situation with my father as like a simple example. Because I'm sure, I love putting practical examples to things. So what would that look like for me? Would it mean like writing down my intentions for going to visit him and helping, find the right caretakers to have a really great support infrastructure for him? Or kind of like, what does that declaring the contribution look like?
Yeah, it could be so many things. And I would really encourage people too, and encourage you too, Brett, to use those tools that you already are using. So it could be the journaling, writing down your intentions, or through your yoga practice. And I really feel like to declare our contributions, we need to get in touch with our heart. So we need to really ask our heart what it desires to contribute. So, and what we need to support that process. So it may be looking at different supports and things like that. I can share a little bit of a personal example, having end of life care with my mom just a couple of years ago, not even about a year and a half ago. And we live in different cities. So I had this whole plan about when I was going to go and visit that summer. And then I ended up there much earlier because my mom got sick. And I had a lot of resistance at first. I got into the city and could feel the resistance, and I knew I didn't really want to be there, and I didn't like what was happening. And then there was one day, I don't know, I went outside and I just tuned in and recognized that this is what was in front of me, and this is what I was meant to respond to. And I just took that moment within myself, like a quiet little meditation, and said yes, basically. And in that process, I recognized that I was being given a gift, because it wasn't going to go on forever. And I was being given a gift to spend that time with my mom and to support her in any way that I could during that period of time, and to connect with my siblings and all of the other gifts that came along with it. So it was just a shift in perspective, if that helps.
Yeah. And is that what you're talking about when you talk about declaring the contribution, is sort of like seeing the gift that's in it for you? I don't know. I don't want to butcher. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yes, that's part of it. And then thinking about what are the tangible ways that I can do that, right? So for me, in that moment, I was very aware then. It was like, okay, so some things are not happening very quickly for my mom here. There's some things that have to happen. Well, I had a background in human services, so I knew how to phone around. I knew how to get a hold of the resources. I knew how to, get more bees with honey kind of thing. And I just went into that mode in order to feel as though I was doing something, and that we could see progress, and stay connected to the fact that I wanted to help, that was my core heart intention. I wanted to help and be present with my mom. And so I don't know if does that help to make it more tangible?
Yes, it does. It does. I think it's seeing the gift in it for yourself, and then acknowledging the concrete actions that you're taking every week or every day, right? Because otherwise it's like we hustle, or I bring the baby to my dad and I visit, and it's like this item on the to-do list, rather than being like, this is something that I am choosing to contribute and I feel good about it. And, great job me at the end of the week. We went over there a couple times. We had some good connections and chats, and, my baby made him laugh, and that kind of thing, right? It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on a key piece there, because quite often when we're in service in whatever way, personal caregiving, traditional, alternative, when we're giving to other people, we also tend to look for the evidence of our contribution in their lives. So we want to see, how is what I'm contributing changing your life? How is it being meaningful and making an impact there? And sometimes we don't see that right away, right? Because change is subtle, and sometimes it doesn't show up the way we think it's going to. So tuning in with ourselves and saying, how was I transformed today? What did I learn today?
Oh, I love that.
We have to do that all the time, because, somebody may be saying thank you at some point down the road, or a supervisor giving you a kudo on your performance appraisal is not enough.
Yeah, and in a lot of these situations that we're talking about now, whether it's caring for a loved one or some other type of service work, mental health or therapist or whatever, it's like that person might never thank you or even acknowledge that you did anything. So you really want to get centered on your own feelings. I love that. I wrote that down. Like, how was I transformed, right, by doing this?
I think that's a huge perspective shift. And that I think is also a way of coming back into that core intention about, what is my contribution, and declaring that for ourselves. When we fall out of sync with that, when we start feeling tired and we feel like, oh, does this even really matter? Then when we ask ourselves again, well, how have I been transformed? What have I been learning? What is my intention? Is that still the same? Has something shifted? Then we're connecting with ourselves, right? We're in a space of self-connection, and we're asking our own heart what we need, and giving ourselves the opportunity to acknowledge what's happening, like in our own evolution. I'm really caring for a loved one at the end of their life, or as they age, or through an illness, or whatever it might be, is such a powerful gift. There's so much to be learned there. Healing that can happen, that's maybe been, a wound for many, many years, that can take place in those moments with somebody if we show up and we're present.
I want to ask you about, because we were kind of talking about how a lot of service activities can feel like a checklist, right? Like another visit or another patient or another client to see or whatever. And I think sometimes people can get overwhelmed because it never feels like enough. Like what sprung into my mind, because I'm sure other people can relate to this, even if it's different situations. Like instead of being like, Brett, great job, you made it over there twice a week this week, or whatever. It's always like, well, I should have been there every day, right? Or for the therapist, it's like, okay, I help someone and talk to them for this hour, but I know they're gonna relapse this weekend or whatever, and it just never feels like enough. So when someone's feeling those sensations, it's almost like this sensation of overwhelm is the way I would describe it, because when we talk about service, it's like there needs to be a boundary there, right? Like, because you could just give infinitely, but then there's no self-care for you as the caretaker. So I'd love to hear you talk to us about this.
Well, you can give infinitely until you can't, right? Like suddenly the rug gets pulled out from underneath us, our bodies stop or whatever it might be, and we can't give anymore. And when you were talking about that sense of overwhelm, or like it's never quite enough, or I'm here meeting with this person, but there's going to be a relapse on the weekend, that kind of thing. The first thing that popped into my mind was the idea of false responsibility, and how quite often we overextend ourselves in service to other people and kind of get ourselves into places where we don't actually belong. And this is a super great opportunity for what I call powerful guiding questions. When we find that happening, that, oh my goodness, like I have to stop this person from, self-destruction or whatever it might be, to ask ourselves, what is it that's going on? Am I afraid? Am I afraid of the outcome? Do I fear, or not believe in this person's capacity for growth? Because quite often that does come up, that we think that we have to make sure that we're taking care and we're helping people to avoid any kind of difficult outcome, and we may be afraid to even bring that up with the individual. We might not want to have that uncomfortable conversation. There could be a lot of things going on, but false responsibility is a huge trap for people in service to humanity. And go ahead.
No, you could. No, I just want to make sure I really understand the concept of this false responsibility. So if you had to define the concept simply, is it basically just that we're all responsible for our own individual destiny and to not really take on the energy of others? Because I think that's what's so interesting, especially, and I'm sure, like you said, many listeners of this podcast, people who are interested in healing, are interested in helping, are change makers, right? Like you said, we don't tend to then receive that well, but at the same time, I feel like we are the type that take so much on, right? Like we feel this over responsibility, and because it's like the highly sensitive person. I don't know if you read that book. It's awesome. But this idea that it's almost like you care too much.
Yeah, which actually ends up turning into not genuine caring. You know what I mean? Because we're depleting ourselves. I think that's where the term, compassion fatigue kind of comes in there too. And it's a term, sometimes I don't even like to say it because I don't believe in it. I don't believe that compassion makes us tired. Compassion is an expression of love, and love is an energizing, vital force, right? When we lack self-compassion, we become exhausted. And so I think that that's a key there. And this idea of overextension, when we start to do that, we're out of integrity. We're out of a place of compassion, because overextension and false responsibility has more to do with control, right?
That's exactly what was on the tip of my tongue. And that's one of the ways that I catch myself, if this is helpful for listeners, whenever I feel that kind of overextension happening, I say, Brett, you're such a control freak. It's almost like self-centered of me to think that I could have this much impact on this person or this situation, right? That's a moment to get back on the yoga mat, whether it's some Kundalini or meditation or whatever, and, get a little bit more of a bird's eye view, because the other side to that coin is oh, I'm so amazing, I'm so helpful, I'm so giving. But the other side of that coin is kind of you think you're really powerful and really can control so much, when we know as yoga practitioners especially, there's very little we can control in this life. I'm going to interrupt us because we are at time for our episode today, but we're going to come back. I'm not letting Elizabeth go, everyone, don't worry. So she and I are going to be back on Thursday. We're going to be riffing on all these same topics. So if you're someone who just feels like you're someone who gives a lot in life, you're a healer, you're a teacher, you're a leader, or maybe you're just in a situation like me in the role of a caretaker in a new way for the first time, you're going to want to tune in on Thursday to catch all that we're going to continue to talk about. So I'm sending you so much love. I can't wait to connect with you in Thursday's episode, and from my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.